Thank you. It can't be that big, even if it was a gigabyte.
It says it's recording.
Uh-oh.
So there we go.
I wonder what it'll record. If it'll record one camera and not the other, or whatever camera is the primary one?
Great question. I don't know.
Well, we'll see.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we definitely gonna find out. Okay.
Okay, so
start up. It's 2 o'clock.
Yeah, might as well.
What time? How many people we got?
About 29.
All right, 30 what we had last time, so maybe we'll get a few more.
Yeah. They're definitely off the. Yeah, we got 2 inches of table, so we can see your hands right now as an example.
Oh, so I could actually push it in further.
Yeah, we could. There we go. There we go.
All right, so we are now. Can you see the bottom of the? Can you see the table?
We're good. Yep.
Okay.
There we go.
All righty, let's get cracking. Okay, welcome back. I'm gonna do a demo today, and let's start first by going over
Logistics.
the logistics of the Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, why don't you say what you want them to do when they come in for the Zoom meeting, my love?
Okay. And several of you have already heard this, but just in case you have not, when you enter, please turn your video off as well as your mic so that way everyone is going to be seeing Stephen and not whoever's mic is live. So if you could please turn your video off and your mics, that would be great. I will try my best to ensure that remains that way. If something happens though, you're welcome to message me directly. I'm the one that says Kate Perry. And that should do it.
Thank you, my darling. So in terms of the logistics of what I'm using, once again, I'm on Saunders Waterford rough, 140-pound paper, and my palette is a little Magello or Magello with a J painting palette. It's like 10 or 15 bucks. And I have Cadmium Yellow by American Journey. I have Naples Yellow by M. Graham, Cadmium Yellow by American Journey, Burnt Sienna by American Journey, Joe's Red by American Journey, their substitute for Alizarin Crimson, which is like a PV19 derivative, and Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt Blue, Cobalt Blue, Turquoise Light, which is by Winsor Newton, Viridian, which is by American Journey again. This is Pearlin Green, which is Winsor Newton, and Dioxazine Violet, which is also by Winsor Newton. So when I start off, I'm always spritzing the palette down. I need to get everything wet, and I want it to soak in while we're chit-chatting for the next 10 minutes or so, and then just to sort of soften up the paint. I cleaned my palette, it's so pretty. I am gonna do this subject. Can you see it on here? We can, relatively speaking. So this is a spring, bring it down. Okay, a spring snow that we encountered a few years ago up in the Sierras. So we had all these aspen that were in leaf and were these verdant greens of spring, and yet the snow was falling at the same time when we were caught in a snowstorm. So we're gonna try this out and see how it goes. It's an interesting subject because a lot of the shapes move from being a positive shape to a negative shape depending on where they are in the subject. And what I mean by that is, like, as an example, these leafy greens down here at the base of the trunks of the trees, they are the pale value at the top of their shape. They're against this dark background behind the trees. And then they move to becoming the dark value against the snow, right? So similarly, we have other areas where, like in here, maybe this dark shape of this background green tree moves in, then in a different section, it's the pale value against a darker background. So I like this idea that we're going to move back and forth between shapes being negative shapes and positive shapes, depending on where we find them in the painting. I did do a no-tan, and that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So I should bring it up. The no-tan is, there we go. Here's the no-tan for it. And I'm going to bring the other painting in, so the original photo, so you can see the two. So these trees become these pale values here. And all of these dark background trees are meant to be darker than this. They're going to help offset the aspens. And then in the foreground, we have this pale value of the snow with all these little shrubby bits coming down along the hill. So this is going to be what we'll be doing. This no-tan will guide me as we go through. And a lot of what the no-tan will show me is if it's white on the no-tan, it means that in a nutshell, I'm painting it on the first wash. It means I'm going to apply the color and the value for that, broadly speaking, those shapes. So whatever it is here on this little mountain in the distant background, and whatever is the pale green value of these trees, and whatever green we have here on the slope, and of course this white of the hillside with snow on it, all of those that are white in the no-tan, I'm going to be painting them in the first wash. And then everything that's black in the no-tan, I'll be applying in the second wash. That means things like all these trees in the background, even though they're not super duper dark, these are all going to be painted secondarily. They're going to create the form of these aspens. And all of this very interesting dark background, which is offsetting their trunks, all of that's going to get painted in the second wash as well. So the no-tan helps me see how the shapes are relating, and they help me plan out how I'm going to approach the painting, and helps me simplify things. So there's lots of interesting and complicated shapes in these trees in the background, and I'm going to simplify those because the painting isn't about those background trees. It's really about these trees in the foreground with the green against the snow. And so here I've actually simplified the background, and doing the no-tan has helped me simplify that block so that the subject's easier to read. So I'm gonna this will be on camera off to the left of the painting, and if we can find a spot for the no-tan, perhaps at the top, I'll also leave it on camera. Something like that. Yeah, now we should be able to see all the different parts. So I have my mops, and I'm going to wet the back of the paper, and I'm going to help it start to soak into the paper, and then I'm going to do my drawing, and the paper will be soaking it up. But this will allow us to do two things at once. Basically, it takes a couple applications for the paper to get wet and to soak up the water into the body of itself. And I don't want to hang around with you guys for 10 minutes just waiting for the inside of the paper to get wet like a sponge. So I've turned it over, and I am pretty liberally applying water. You know, it's lots of water. There's a big puddle here. Did you mute them? Or are folks just being quiet?
They are muted.
I see. Couldn't get it to work a different way. It's okay.
If they want to unmute themselves to ask questions, they can.
I see.
Otherwise, they should stay muted because it'll keep flipping your video off of the main frame.
Well, we don't want to flip them off. That's bad news. So, but of course, please ask questions if you guys have questions. I am here to share and to do them, and to answer them, right? So I have not painted this painting before. This is a little fun for me and a sharing opportunity for you. So it isn't a painting that I've done 2 or 3 times and that I have complete control of. The goal is just to paint and discover it a bit as we go through it, and to have a good time painting together, and hopefully to share some things as I go along. I'm pressing down the paper just to help it create a good connection with the board. It helps it stop rolling up as it's kind of connecting and getting wet. So I had some little droplets on it. I wipe them off, and away we go. Oh, I'm so finicky. It is not straight.
Chris wants to know, what sort of board are you applying the paper to?
I like to use Gator board. So Gator board is a foam core board, and it has a hard cuticle that they apply to the exterior of it, and it's waterproof. So the moisture never goes past the surface of the board, that's good for things like this, where I really want it to go into the body of the paper instead. So let's see if I turn it over for a moment. You can kind of, it's got a hard cuticle layer. And as you can see, water tension really works, right? The board and the paper become one object, essentially. For this drawing, a lot of it is going to be painted with the brush and not the pencil. Some of the drawings really do require some finesse, and the one that I did last week had a barn in it and whatnot. That required that we do a real drawing that showed the barn and things, because I had to let that guide my shapes. For something like this, we have a natural shape, which is the trees, and we have a lot of activity in the trunks. And that means that I can't draw all that out. That'll sort of suck the life out of the painting. Instead, those sorts of things I'm going to have to sort of ad-lib as I go, and we'll build the feeling of those. And I did a relatively detailed sketch here in the notan, but eventually I had to just leave it alone and just suggest the idea of trunks in the body of it. So everything in the background, I'm not going to draw. It starts over here and it goes across the paper, and that's about all I need to know. I'll just make a tick mark and a tick mark. This is just to guide me later that this is going to be the edge of the mountainside. And then I have the most important part, which is these trees. So the trees have a ground plane, and it comes in, if we come and use quadrants as a simple way to understand the comparative size of the different areas. Here I've just done it into quarters. This one, this is the ground plane, is essentially, this is halfway mark, this is a quarter mark. Here's the other trees, and they're also at a quarter mark. So if I divide this into quarters, very, very gently, and then I do another quarter, this is the ground plane. And it goes mostly across paper, right? And here's halfway, and here's the next, the 3/4 mark. This is the shape of all of the trees in the background.
Karen wants to know what size the paper is.
It is a quarter, what they call a quarter sheet. So it's a 15 inches tall by 11 inches wide. And it's a quarter sheet simply because you divide the full size sheets that you get you tear it in half and in half. And I guess you could have any size that you wanted, but the funny part ends up being that you have to frame stuff, and when you're framing things, unless you're like a full-time artist, and I'm not, you have to have some sort of consistent size for mats and for frames and things like that. So I tend to either do the full-size sheet or half sheets or quarter sheets, and it's hard to do specialized sizes, because then you have to get specialized mats and things. So here we have these trees kind of receding into the background. And I don't know can you see them on the video, Kate?
A little bit.
A little bit. They're just squiggly marks. They're really there only to let me know that the trees go here and not up there and not way down here. That's their primary function. Here we have the beginnings of the aspen trees that comes in at about the halfway mark, right? And again, I'm going to be loose with these. I just want to know there's a trunk and branches and a tree shape. And then here is the other tree shape. I have my notan to help guide me. I can see as an example when I look at comparative shapes that this portion of the aspen trees or the birch trees is coming down where this comes. So this comes into here and this goes up to here, right? So they're guiding, the previous shape is guiding me for the new shape. That's how they connect. And then away it goes. And I do need this little shape edge here is this edge here. So there is actually an aspen tree behind it, but it's of a darker value. But I do want to sort of separate these two greens. So it comes in, and then we can see that the line of the canopy is relatively straight. So it comes in, wiggles its way down a little bit, and it goes off camera. And I can see that there's a little secondary shape here. It sort of connects. There's a nice little tree. Down it goes. And then I just want to get the idea of some of these trunks in, right? So a lot of these will disappear as I begin to paint it. And some will remain, but it won't matter because I'm not super duper interested in making sure I paint every trunk. I just want this idea of the trunks. And when I draw them like this, it's a good way to sort of pay attention to the shapes of the trunks and how they relate to each other. I'm also interested in understanding the patterns that are going on. Are you having some problems, my love? Okay. Where, like,
Carolyn, you are sharing your screen with us, sweetie. So we can't see anything else but your screen. You push the share screen button. I need you to unshare that. Thank you.
You're back?
We are back.
Okay. So we have like little patches of trunks that are very close, and then we have a dark area, and then we have some more trunks, and then we have a dark area, and they're divided out into different kinds of shapes and different kinds of comparative size. And I do find that interesting, how we divide up the space.
Instead of being like Joan, okay? Instead of being like Joan.
Fuck you.
Yeah. There we go.
So away we go. Down the hill we go. And I'm just sort of sketching some of these in. They do not obviously relate one-to-one to the trunks in the actual photo. And that's okay with me.
Love, can you maybe pull the camera down a little bit, because we're having a hard time seeing the sketching there, and
Well,
maybe you could pull the board up to it so people can at least see what's going on there.
sure. I don't know. Can you see it any better now?
Yeah, a little bit. There we go.
So
We're getting some stuff here.
this is a line for the horizon line as it slopes down the hill. And in here we have some of the trunks that I was talking about. This is the trees of the birch trees. And then these are the trees of the pines in the background. And then I don't want to draw in the line for the hillside because it's going to be very faint and I don't really care to have the line show up over when we're done. So I'm almost done with the sketch. You know, it's funny showing sketches when we do demos. Part of it is that I like to have people get a sense of how long I take or don't take. That's part of why I like to show the sketches. Even if, and partly it sounds funny, but the goal is for you to see that I'm not drawing really heavily. So I'm not like carving the drawing into the paper. But sometimes you can't see much, so my apologies. All right, so the paper is cool to the touch. It's got water inside of it. I have a rudimentary sketch, and I have my notan, and we'll see what happens. So the sky is going to be a tiny bit of an off-white. So I'm going to get a little blue and a little burnt sienna, a little ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Make them up. Very pale. There we go. Make ourselves kind of a cool gray. And I need something to gently tilt this, my love, like this.
Little book or something?
Yeah, something bowl, maybe, like something upside down. Well, while she's doing that, in goes just the idea of a wash.
I wanted something heavy enough that it wasn't gonna move with you.
Okay. Well, that's what we got, so we'll make do. Okay, sorry, folks. See if this is going to cause problems or be okay. Somebody was saying something? Guess not. Okay. So, I know it's going to be paler, right? The farther when it dries. So I want to punch in a little bit of value. The snow is falling, right? It's also farther away. And as we come down to what will become the background trees, I'll leave a little broken edge, right? And in here, we can, I can wait for a moment and I can mix up some greens. So even though these are the background trees, and even though I am going to paint over the top in the next wash, I do want to sort of block in some basic hues. So I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. I have like my little Chinese calligraphy brush. And they're a muted green. So I have some Viridian, some burnt sienna, and some ultramarine blue. Just a tiny bit of dioxazine purple, right, it'll mute it, bring it to the opposite side of the color wheel, kind of gray it out. And it needs to be a little warmer than that. Something like this. A little warmer even than that. It's muted, but it's a warm, muted green. There we go. It's kind of a piney green. And in it goes. Can folks still see the painting gray on my left?
Well, looks good to me. What do you guys think? Can you see everything fine?
I guess it's tilted, so I was checking it.
I'm getting at least one yes.
Okay, that's a good start.
Thank you for the response, Chris. Oh, we got a couple more.
Okay.
Yay, thank you guys.
All right, so the water is, I've tilted the board, and that's going to allow the water to sort of very gently run down the paper, and it's letting the top very gently dry off. And I'm mixing up a darker gray to be these background trees, but it's still pretty light gray. Yep, still pretty light. And it's going to dry even lighter. And we got to drop in this idea of distant hillside.
I'm kind of a fan of the muted green.
It's funny, you know, you want to make it, I want to make a muted green and kind of a blue green. That's a real common, like it's a shady kind of color. But I actually find it, they're not always, right? Pine trees are a different kind of green. It's good to understand that. So those little tick marks that I made earlier, there's a tick mark right there. And that's going to be the other side of this distant hillside. So that little mark that I made, that does come in, it has value to me. And that's enough there, right? It's just to propose this idea of this little snowstorm and this faraway trees, these faraway trees in it. And I want to leave some patches of this to be white because I want it to feel like snow, right? I don't want to overpaint it. Over here, the values are a little darker. We're getting closer to the trees. Everything is wet into wet, right? So I can bring these values of the gray hillside, I can bring it down into this very, very gentle gray-green. And it's gonna let me, later, I'm gonna put a darker value for these greens. So I'm gonna build the green shapes on top of what I'm painting now, right? That's why they're black in the no tan. So I'm just mixing up some more of that kind of gray-green. Get us down into the birch trees. So in this kind of space, I definitely, you know, I paint up what's up top, and I'm kind of going sideways like this because I'm looking at the painting to decide if there's any moisture left in the area. If there's moisture left, then I can still paint some little things in that space. If there's no moisture, I'm out of luck, and it's just going to have to wait for a later phase. So it sounds weird, but these little, what I'm painting right now are the highlights, right? These are the highlights for the next phase. Okay. Let's mix up a juicy, bright green. So I have this cobalt teal, cobalt turquoise light, and cadmium yellow. That is a super vibrant green. I do want to dull it just a little. Let's go for it. Everything dulls down later. So once again, I don't have to have any edges right now because I'm going to paint the edge of these birch trees later, right? I'm going to paint the edge of these birch trees, the top edge, with the bottom of the trees in the background. That's why they're black in the no tan. So this is a, relatively speaking, a pretty free time. Yep. Just want to keep this section with the trees, like relatively speaking, moist, so that I don't have stuff bleed back too much. I could see it happening here, just a little. So let me get into this funny little space where I have a lot of different colors and shapes commingling. And I'm looking at how wet the paper is. I want it to be a little wet still, because I can see that I need to bring this shape of the background trees down into here between these two groves. So I'm mixing up a little bit more of that green. And it's getting closer to us as we come down the hill. So once again, I do want a little more chroma and a little more value in these areas. Okay, something like that. And already I can tell that the birch trees are definitely not too vibrant. So I actually would like them to be more vibrant, or at least all of them, the full shape be as vibrant as the section I already knocked in. So here we go. Ooh, right, dancing on the edge there. So we'll back up.
That's where the fun stuff happens.
Ah, no doubt. That's true. And I'm gonna push a little yellow into this area. There's a little section that's a little more punchy. There's a couple little spots, right? I can see them doing their thing. Okay, yeah. And then these trees have these pale trunks. The trunks aren't actually white, at least they're not in this photo. They're like a very pale, burnt sienna, kind of orangey yellow color. And it's pretty pale. So I'm mixing it up into a pretty watery mixture. Something like this, that'll work. And all of the trunks, right, are gonna get painted, so to speak. The shape of the trunks will become clear in the second wash. We have to paint them negatively. That's the function. And that's the function of the second wash. There we go. A little more brown. This is where that the sketch comes in and has some use for me. It helps remind me, where did I decide I wanted these trunks to start, and where do they end, right? And I'd like for them to be this very gently warmer hue. So I want to get them, I want to get that in there now. So I do need to block in this pale, warm hue. And a little tiny bit goes into the bodies of the leafy areas. And I'm really just playing here, but I want to complicate the aspen shapes. Pardon me, spitting. There we go. So
He's not usually that polite when he spits on it.
well, I am doing a demo. I want these aspen shapes are a little consistent, right? They're a little bit like a big block, and I don't want them to stay that way. So I am attempting to sort of open them up a little bit. Alrighty. Let's bring in some more springy kind of green. At the bottom of the this wash, we have more spring green type of stuff. And this is one of those areas where a little finesse is of value. I'm going to, this area at the bottom, boy, I will almost be done with the bottom of the painting. I'll almost be done when I'm done painting this initial wash. So I just, right, because the background in this area, I really am gonna let it stay white. It's closer to us. I think the snow in that area would have been more vibrant as I remember it. Kat was telling me we have Richard from British Columbia. So Richard, thank you for joining me today. Nice to have you on here. And hey, okay. And we have 3 gals from Oregon. It's Linda and Kathy and another Linda. Okay. They have a surplus of Lindas in
There
Oregon.
can never be too many windows.
Fair enough, my love. And Manish from Kentucky. Oh, is this the fellow that came from Kentucky last time? Oh, fun. Welcome back. And pardon me, I am going to switch to a smaller brush here at the bottom of the painting. I need to keep this moist. I'm going to work it a little bit. And I have a second Chinese brush, calligraphy brush, and I'm going to try out it. The shapes are getting smaller for these little pieces of foliage. I need to be able to control the shapes. like it. I remember being startled by how green it was, yeah, given the storm and all the other pine trees around, right? It was a peculiar and beautiful scene. So uh, I do need to push these greens in here because these greens, the shape of the greens isn't dictated by what I do now. It'll be dictated by what goes on in the second wash when I put the darks in. So I do want to get the greens to be vibrant in this phase. All right. And yeah, we're getting there. So in these early washes, to me, yes, there are little sections where you need to pay attention to what you're doing. That is true. But I really feel like the real problem is oftentimes that people are too cautious in this phase. I think that ends up costing you something later, particularly in your application of color. So, this is, for some of these areas where I'm blocking in these kind of crazy greens, this is it. The painting's not going to get more vibrant than these greens are. And everything is going to become more muted as it dries, right? It's watercolors. So you definitely, in my opinion, you should be, relatively speaking, daring in these earlier phases. And I think you'll benefit from that. You'll see the darks will have a complement of this hue complement. When you paint them dark later, they don't really express much in the way of color. The darker they get, the less chromatic they are. And so, the lights that you're going to capture, if I give them some punch at this phase, then that hue will also come through later. So when I was doing the no-tan, one of the things I noticed is that part of what expresses the sense of perspective and dimension in this hillside is that we have this long section that goes down the side, and then this rotates as it comes along, right? So it was important to me that this start farther over and come a little bit more straight. And this one rotates, and then there needs to be an open space here. Okay. Time for some daring do. Give me my cape. Yeah. So like I said, I want to complicate it and open it up a little bit. And if we can, we're going to do this wet into wet. It'll get a little messy, but I think it's going to make it more interesting. Right? The goal is, the most important goal to me is that it's interesting. I'd like for it to tell the story that I remember of this snowstorm, this sort of spring snow. That's, yes, but also it has to be interesting visually. And this little area where the aspens are is really it's the heart of the painting, right? And that means to me that it's got to be interesting visually. So we got to come in here and make the shapes a little more sophisticated, a little more complex, little spaces where we have other values and other little edges that communicate the idea of the kind of amazing nuance of a tree, where we have a lot of values mixing together, a lot of hues mixing together to create that dimension that we like so much. Let's see, who else has come and joined us? I wanted to say hi to Karen from Key West. Is the weather good in Key West right now? It's Florida, right? It's good here in California today, I have to say. It's been a warm, sunny weekend. We had to close up the house this morning and turn on the fans. So, feels like spring. We have Lori from New Jersey. Thank you for coming. And Chris from Alameda, local. I've had a good time painting in Alameda for their annual paint out.
And we also have a super local, Jackie from Benicia.
Hey, Jackie, how could I do a demo without you? All right.
Love you, Stephen.
Hey, Jackie, it's nice to hear your voice. Doing good?
Oh yes, wonderful.
Good.
It's great.
Good.
It's a great Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
All right. You've been painting?
Now, yes.
Okay.
What if I didn't paint? I'd have gone crazy.
I had no doubt, man. True.
Yeah.
Karen says it's hot. It's in 90 degrees in Key
Oh.
West.
Eesh, that is hot. It's in line with like maybe the low 80s, high 70s here. Yeah. All right. And down in the foreground, I do see some small twigs and things, and I want to bring them in as just the tiniest bit of warm accents, right? To sort of draw us into the foreground. This sort of stuff is nearing the end of the initial wash. But I like, it's almost even not there in the photo, but I don't really care. Because I like the idea of these little sophisticated warm accents that drop in and pull you into the subject. All right. Right. Some little bits. So in just a little tiny bit here, I'm going to hop off camera because I'm getting close here to the end of this phase, and I'm going to go and dry it, and we'll take a little break so people can get up and go to the bathroom and grab a bite to eat and do whatever they want.
If you want, I can dry and you can take questions.
That's a great
Then
idea.
people can turn their
Right. Like it won't matter as much.
Yeah, people can turn their mics on. It won't be a big deal.
I think that's a grand idea.
Excellent.
Dropping in some little bits of shadow. They're always gently tilting down at an angle to help communicate the slope, right? That's always important. And I like to try and make sure I get some stuff to go off screen, so that give you this feeling that the painting is extending past the shape of the paper. So here, for example, I like this idea that the trunk and the greenery comes to the bottom. And over here, I was on a micro level, just sort of making sure that the shadows also didn't accidentally trap themselves within the body of the paper, right? Up here, I also like that the mountaintop went off the top and didn't somehow only come off the bottom, just so everything's slightly, at an angle. Everything's very gently expanding past the borders of the painting. Sometimes you'll see paintings by a novice painter, and one of the problems will be that they trapped everything in the body of the paper itself. Nothing gets to escape. That could definitely be a little issue. Okay, I'm gonna wait on this over here. I'm gonna let myself do this in the second wash. And we'll say this is good for the moment. And then I'm gonna come back in and we're gonna do a lot of darks. Catherine, do you mind?
Not at all.
Excellent, thank you, my love.
Hand it on over.
Yep.
And folks, if you want to unmute and ask questions, please do at this point. Just let him know who you are, because he can't see a screen that will tell him those things. How long for this?
Probably 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
The top needs to be dry to the touch, but it doesn't have to be dry on the bottom level. So. They have their audio on? Okay, that's fine.
Steve, this is
Yes.
Pam Steinmetz.
Oh, hi, Pam.
Hi. Listen, I have a question for you.
Sure,
I'm doing a series of mustard grass paintings,
uh-huh.
and my question is, if you want to highlight the yellow, I'm trying to think of, should I be doing negative painting? When there's a dark green behind that yellow.
Yep.
I don't want to add the yellow at the end. You know what I mean?
No.
No.
I agree.
But I want to make that yellow, keep that yellow really crisp. So
I actually did a series. Did I post about the series of Napa mustard paintings that I did last month?
No,
On the
I
blog?
don't remember them.
You do or do not?
I don't remember seeing them.
Then maybe I did not share them. I did a series of, I did a couple of Napa mustard paintings last month. So it's actually fresh.
Okay.
So
anyway, so I would start then with a green, with a yellow, a bright yellow wash.
yes is
And
the
then
short
go in-
answer.
Yes, it's a short answer.
Yeah, there's nothing like experimenting in something that is not your painting, right? To
Yes.
see what the results are and then apply it to your painting. So I've tried and had middling success doing a light green limey wash and then maybe splattering wet into wet cadmium yellow or something into it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get them to have those little splats retain their shape. They kind of want to dissolve into the green. Some of that could be fixed with timing.
Yeah.
But I also tried the opposite recently, and I thought I liked my results better, which is that I did do a wash with yellow and a rich, vibrant wash, and then I splattered into it as it was drying, not too early. If you do it too early, your greens will just dissolve.
Exactly.
And I splattered into it some like a limey green and some viridian, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that I felt gave me that mottled look where you have certain areas in a mustard field that have patches that are greener, right?
Yeah.
Patches that are yellower. And then later on, even after that first layer dried, I had to go back in and wash, either spritz water into an area after it was like 1,000,000,000% dry. And then I also did green splatters into it again to help create that sort of undulation between areas that are more purely yellow, but not 100% yellow, and areas where there's some patch that's more green. So I did find going into the yellow, doing the yellow first worked better because it's just not strong enough to keep it.
I had some luck using salt.
Sure. I could imagine that.
with getting the just enough modeling of the yellow and green to make it look like mustard grass.
Yeah. I could totally see that. I also did some ones where they, you know, you have to figure out how much is enough. It's like seasoning.
Exactly. It's so tricky.
So, you know, I was like doing a little bit of grass strokes into the meadow to help it have that grassy feeling, a little bit here and there, and that helped as well. So that sort of stuff definitely is the key. It's like how much is enough to share the symbol of a meadow, of a mustard grass meadow, without trying to somehow render it, right?
Right.
Yes, but I did feel the paler value colored first worked better, because actually a mustard grass meadow is really predominantly yellow, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And I never have been satisfied with splattering yellow onto what's on the background if the background is dry.
Yeah.
For me, it is not my flavor. I find it a little pasted on. I want to somehow integrate the shapes more.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, it's very, very challenging. I have lots of trees.
Yes.
I have lots of trees, you know, that have light trunks to make it even more complicated. So
That is complicated.
yeah,
Well,
so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do all this. But I'm committed to doing 8 of them. So we'll see how it comes out.
Iteration. I was just writing an email to a lady today about iterating, right? That's how you're gonna experiment and learn something and apply it in the next one.
Yep.
Well, I'm gonna do these trees also have a pale trunk, and that means that you know, this will be one of the approaches for how to make the pale trunks function.
Yeah.
In this one, I'm going to lay down my darks around the trunks, and then I'm going to scrape out some of the highlights for branches and some of the trunks with a palette knife. And if I need to, I'll go back in with white mixed up with some kind of burnt sienna or Naples yellow to have a warm white if I want to put little bits in to create the shapes. So it's hard to make white trunks really work. They're difficult if you've got a lot of them, unless they're very small. Then they're an abstract. When they start to become bigger, it's harder to render them and make them look realistic.
Well, these are eucalyptus.
Have you been looking at Herman Peckel's work?
I have seen his work, but I haven't looked at it in a while.
Go find him on Facebook.
Okay.
He's using this quarantine time to paint like mad out in the bush. And he's painting lots and lots of eucalyptus trees. So you can at least see his approach to these trunks, and they're often painted negatively. And they're often, the ones that are in watercolor. And then he does just gorgeous oils also. But you'll see how he approaches things. He must be simplifying. Right? Just some of them have to be a darker value, and some of them he paints negatively and creates the shape that way. Okay. So, but that might be of value to you. Thank you, my love.
I'll have to do that.
Oh yeah, they're definitely dry enough.
Okay. I went to town.
You did. In fact.
Is it too dry?
Well, it's not sticking down. I'm trying to think about whether I want to wet the back again for this second wash. And if I want to wet the back, it needs to be drier. Does that make sense? I got to be drier first before I start so that it doesn't reactivate the paint on the surface.
Okay. What would you like me to do?
I guess now I do actually need you to dry it all the way on the back too. And then I'll come and I'll re-wet the back to apply it. Thank you very much. You're doing a wonderful job.
Rachel would like to know how you spell Herman Peckel.
It's either, I guess it's Peckel. Peckel. P-E-K-E-L. So P-E-K-E-L, Herman. He's an Aussie. And I'm assuming he's from the Melbourne area because he's a friend of Joseph's and Joseph's book fishes, and they paint together sometimes. But he's definitely an Aussie. He's a great painter. Yeah.
He's a wonderful painter.
He is. I find his scenes in the bush and nature are, in my opinion, his forte. I think he paints them with a kind of it's just a different kind of bravado. I care less for his urban scenes, but I think his scenes with buttes and ponds and different things are just gorgeous. They're beautiful paintings. He really understands the messy vibrancy of the woods. So it's worth checking. Pam, am I on the video or am I free to walk around and see if other people are asking questions by text?
I'm not on. I'm on.
No.
My picture's
Am
in showing
I
up
on the
now.
video? Am I on video?
Yes,
Oh, I
yeah.
am. Yeah. So I can
Yeah.
stop picking my nose. I got you. All right.
Okay.
I'm going to go around for a moment. Don't see if anybody asks.
Is anybody else painting along?
That's a fascinating question.
No.
That's a really good question.
I don't know. I'll admit, as a student myself, I have a hard time painting alone. It's very difficult for me.
You want to watch more than paint.
Well, I do. I do want to watch more than I want to paint, and I want to. Oh, if I'm watching a demo and I'm very interested, I might take notes. If they're doing a kind of technique that that's new to me. I mean, sometimes I go to a demo because I'm just kind of excited about what they're doing. But sometimes I'm going to a demo. Thank you, darling.
The board itself is a little wet.
Okay. I want to go to a demo because sometimes I want to go to a demo because they're doing something I really don't know anything about. That's fun and exciting. So for something like that, oh yeah, I'll pay more attention and actually take notes instead of painting.
For
Go ahead.
yeah, for a mere student, it's more of a watch than a paint.
Yeah. All right. So the paper is dry. And it's actually a tiny bit cool in the middle, but that's not a problem. And this is fine too. It's the tiniest bit.
There is a little dampness on there.
Why does it matter? It doesn't matter a lot, but I'm going to put my paper on this upside down. So I'd like for it to be dry. All right, back at it. Here we go. I need to re-wet. I need to re-wet the back of the paper to get it to lay flat. So I'm just liberally applying water. Welcome, Peggy from Brentwood. Oh, Peggy. Peggy, you're the woman who signed up for my class, but then we had to cancel the workshop. Is that correct? You the right Peggy?
We'll find out in a minute.
Yes.
Yes, it's the same, one and the same.
One and the same. Well, welcome to my demo.
Well, thank you. It's, better than nothing, but in person would be so much better.
Yeah, that is such a bummer.
I also saw your demo at I think it's the firehouse, and
Oh, fun. Yes, that was a good demo.
it was a beautiful painting.
Thank you. I had a good time with that. Sold later on. It's not the definition of whether it's a good painting, but it doesn't hurt. They don't all sell, that's for sure. And welcome to Lise from Quebec. Lise, you came to the demo last time, is that correct? Were you the same person from Quebec? We'll find out. Yep, I remember that also. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm a French people.
Yes.
I understand but better than I speak.
And as is often the way for people who are speaking a foreign language. Well, thank you. Your English is much better than my French. So, merci beaucoup.
Okay. Oh, very good.
Yes, the beginnings, right? So I'm letting the paper start to soak up the moisture. Pardon me, I'm just sort of looking at this myself.
What were you looking for?
Well, thank you, my love. That's a great question. As things dry, they become less vibrant, right? I was talking about that earlier. And I have some question in my mind about whether or not the hill in the background is dark enough and has enough substance to be a hill in the background or not. So, right, I like this kind of hilly scene, this sense of being in the woods, but I also, you know, I don't want to make the painting about the hill, but it's part of the scene, just like if you go to a play, right? So you can imagine whatever you want, but I don't know, part of me also wants to somehow make sure we understand what it is. I'm going to leave it alone. So I can always go in later if I want to. I did that last time. You know, demos are funny. You do paint when you do a demo, but they're not like painting. They're really a teaching opportunity. And painting is sometimes messier, and there's a back and a forth when you're painting. And in a demo, you kind of got to go like in a straight line, right, to get from here to there. So when I'm done with a demo, when I'm done with a painting, done in quotation marks, you know, I let it sit. And sometimes you come back to it the next day and you recognize little things because your eyes are fresh. And then, you know, oh, this needs to have a glaze in this section or whatever the case might be. And so like last time I did the barn and with the sunlit field. And after I was done, it was clear to me that the sky was not a strong enough value. It wasn't blue, dark enough, or rich enough. And the mid-ground, which was where the main subject was, wasn't warm enough. So I actually did an orange wash, a gentle orange wash on top of the mid-ground the next day. And I did an upside down wash on the sky, meaning it was pale at the bottom and I wanted it richer and darker at the top. So, so this might be something that I would do an extra wash on later on this band, just to make it speak more. But at the same time, it's fine for the moment. So the painting isn't about it. Thank you, my love. This is the painting I did last time, and it was fine. All the darks were just as they are as you see them, but I felt that the sky and the mid-ground were washed out, and I unfortunately didn't take a photo before I decided to do this wash on top of it, so my apologies as a teaching opportunity. But I came in, I did a wash here of orange, and then I turned it upside down, and I tilted it, and then I did a wash here. I put water along where this cloud was, and then I did a wash of ultramarine on top of it. And I just felt like by making the sky darker, it makes the barn pop more. And it makes the complement of the barn, the warmth of the muted warmth of the barn roof and the sky much more dynamic. And the same goes for the field versus the sky, right? And these shadows on the main structure in the foreground are generally speaking a cool gray, a cool blue gray, and I wanted them also to sort of communicate this contrast in hue. So this was something that came to me definitely after the demo. It's just part of the painting process, right? Your brain's got to sit on it and think sometimes a little bit. So who knows about what we're currently working on? We'll see.
Kathy wants to know, how did you manage to put another wash of ultramarine in the sky without it granulating? When I do that, it gets ugly.
Well, my experience is that it granulates if I put another wash on top, if I do it when the wash underneath is still a little wet. So I don't know what your experience was and if you were doing a wash on top of it later and everything was 100% dry. But I do find sometimes if I put a wash back on top of an existing wash and the first wash is still damp, it reactivates it. And definitely then you can get super duper granulation. I've had that happen. Sometimes that's an interesting technique actually to use on purpose. But for something like this, I don't know. There is some granulation. It may not be coming through in the video. So that's hard for me to say. I'm sorry I don't have more on that.
She says that, okay, that must be it. I am too impatient.
Yeah, this was done literally like another day. So it was very dry. So as we've been talking, this has been soaking up water, but I can see that there are little bubbles. And the little bubbles are areas that aren't properly wet. That's what we're waiting for, to get this to be equally saturated across the surface, and it helps it stick better. It's also watery. So, and now I can realign this and use the side of my hand, try to get less oils on the paper. And I could smooth that out. There used to be a bubble here in the middle.
Kathy, also on the note of drying, oftentimes Stephen will actually take a painting and put it outside in the sun to dry, and he'll start an entirely different painting so that he doesn't let his impatience like overrule his good sense on how dry it needs to be.
For sure. Well, and sometimes on that note, sometimes I do the 2 paintings. I thought of doing 2 paintings today, but it would take longer than 2 hours. It wouldn't take 4 hours, but it'd probably take 3 because I would have done a simpler painting. But sometimes I've had interesting experiences where the second painting is actually more interesting to me because it's less precious. I'm just sort of doing it on a whim. And that's neat for a pale color, yeah, for a pale color. But I have to be thoughtful about how much I put in. And all right, and we're getting there. This is close. A little bit warmer.
Masuk, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, you're more than welcome to. I see your hand there.
I'm Masuk. All right, let's rock and roll. I really love painting the pine trees and things with the side of the belly of the brush. I find it's a very great way to sort of express the idea of the tree without being too precious about the details, right?
Chris wants to know what sort of sponge is that?
This is not a sponge. Oh, this sponge. This is a nasty old sponge.
He stole it from our kitchen.
It's from the kitchen.
I'm just gonna be honest.
Yeah, no, there's no reason to lie about it. So I mean, I get the ones that don't have some of them have cleaning agents in them from the beginning. So I do make a point of not getting those. And then I just buy them in packs of 6. And eventually they stop holding moisture very well. They just get too old.
Margaret wants to know what colors are you using right now? What did you just blend to get that?
So when I do my greens and they're a dark green, I oftentimes mix up my dark, which is all, I don't know, 80-90% of the time ultramarine blue, and some burnt sienna in my blue well. And then over here in the green well, I'll put in something like some Viridian, and then maybe I'll grab some burnt sienna or some of the Naples yellow to warm it up. And then once I kind of get the hue that I'm interested in, meaning, you know, if I want a warm green or whatever the case might be, then I'll bring in the dark and I'll tone it down that way. So this was ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mixed up with some Viridian. And then I used a little bit of the Naples yellow and a little bit of the more of the burnt sienna to kind of get this, yeah, that's a pretty good green. Kind of a muted piney green, right? And then in they go. I feel like these are a little too dark, mostly because what's behind them is not particularly dark. So I'm going to remedy that. But, you know, for these pines, the most important part to me is that they kind of express, this sounds silly, pininess. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to, they're really there for the shape so that I can communicate these trees in the foreground. And so they have to be a darker value. But I do want them to look like pines, but they're not going to be sophisticated in the middle. So this ridge at the top is kind of important to express the nature of a pine. So I have here a very mildly damp tissue, paper towel. I just am pressing, and I'm definitely not wiping up. I've done that. You don't want to do that. And I just want to sort of bond these two shapes together more, right? I want to transition from something mistier and less dominant. Then down in here, it's going to get a little darker. Then I'm going to spritz it. Always from a distance, right? I'm really letting tons of tiny little particles of water drift down and sort of consistently apply themselves to the surface of the paper. If I go too close, I'll charge an area with the water and it'll just blast it into oblivion. So we don't want to do that. So I'm always, I don't know, a foot, 6, 8 inches, 10 inches, something like this away.
On the note of water, Rachel would like to know, based on watching a demo earlier this week of a different artist who uses distilled water because tap water contains chemicals. What are your thoughts on distilled versus
Well, you can see, if you can see me chuckling, then you know what my opinion is. I don't change those. If anybody ever brings up water, it's almost always because somebody's using distilled water. Maybe it works, and I'm being silly, and I just haven't tried it yet. And then when I try it, I'll sing its praises. I use what's on hand, and currently that's just tap water. When I'm getting some ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna and a little perylene green to get a darker green, because I'm going to start bringing it down. Woo! Didn't mix it up to get down into here. So, for example, when I paint on site, and I did all these redwood scenes, I was like, oh, I got no more water. Well, you know, I went down to the stream, literally got it from the stream. And when I go to the ocean, and I'm painting at the ocean, I'm like, well, I need some water, so I stick a scoop out of the ocean. You know, and I think, does it make my paintings better? Probably not. But I like it on a philosophical level, you know? It's sort of like how on a philosophical level, I really don't mind the idea of spitting on my paintings. And I do it because it gives me a modeled effect. But I also, it's like, hey, this is partly me. It doesn't bother me so much. I'm putting these in, it's going to complicate this area, make the pigments run around a little bit.
Chris, yes, Richard is right. One of the buckets of water is for cleaning brushes and one is
Yes.
for,
Dirty water.
Yep.
Yep. I did not mention that. My apologies. Alrighty. Now comes some of the complicated stuff.
Karen says sometimes she likes to mix it up with her water intake from the Atlantic and other times from the Gulf.
Yes, I approve of this mentality.
Chris wants to know if the salt water that you used from ocean water, it changes the painting.
No, my experience is the answer is no anyways.
Not enough salt to make a difference.
I guess so, right? I mean, I guess it must or could, but it hasn't for me. It hasn't been an issue. I'm getting into this little area where these background trees are coming down to meet the foreground, right? Or at least, or the midground. The midground being my primary subject. So these birch trees. And so I am trying to remember that my painting is not about these trees in the background. Very easy to get lost in subjects in the background, and then suddenly like a little alarm goes off and you think, what the hell am I doing? Spending so much time on this background, which is true. So without further ado, I mean, the background has to do its job. That's just something, right? And after that, sometimes it can do its job so well that it's like you go to a play and then you leave the play and you say, man, that stage setting was amazing. I think if you're going away from a play and you're talking about the stage setting, that's a comment on the rest of the play. And these are the same height, and I don't like that. One of them should be more dominant. Now I have this little experience coming down, right? Here I like that this one goes up, then this one goes down, so I'm not making a chain. This one could come up, right? This one goes a little higher. I am thinking about those sorts of things. I have a funny blob here in the middle. There you go. I don't mind this. You know, part of the pine trees go up and down. So I don't mind this kind of edge on the side, but I do mind this funny little edge in the middle. And come back. Change brush. Yeesh. Dun, 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 dun. I wanted to say hi to Margaret from Washington. Thank you for coming. And George from San Antonio. And Catherine said Dan is from San Francisco. This is the Dan from my workshop. We will find out. Okay. So Catherine sent me a little note and says, hey, it's 3:30, Buster.
Yes, it is that, Dan.
It is that, that Dan. Well, thank you for coming. Are you still drawing regularly? Dan was teaching himself to paint and draw, and
every day he says.
And this guy, man, I mean, the improvement was amazing. So, you know, I'm always talking. I was just writing an email to this lady who asked, you know, how should I learn to paint? What do I need to do? That kind of stuff. And I wrote her a long reply. I'll probably post it as a blog post, because it was like, well, should I learn how to draw? Should I learn how to paint? Should I take a class? Should I go to university? You know, and I was like, save your money. But I did say, I can imagine almost nothing is more important than, you know, you have to know how to paint. You have to know how to draw. You have to know how to draw. It's just almost impossible if you can't draw. So that is a big deal. Nobody wants to hear it, right? Particularly, I mean, I think if you were 12, I told you got to learn to draw. They'd be like, okay. But whenever I talk to adults, they give me lit. I don't want to hear that. They're older. They ain't got no time. Be drawn. They got to get down to painting now. And so I definitely hear that a lot. And what can I say? It's true. It's just the truth. If you're coming into making art at an older age and you've not done art as a younger person, and you don't know how to draw, it's hard. Everything just is more difficult. And it's going to stop you from competently painting certain things. And in the end, in my opinion, you just have to take the time to learn to draw. You can draw and paint, you know, take a class on each or something like that. But I do think that's an important thing. All right. So I'm just integrating these shapes, right? I'm taking this, these trees, and we're coming down through the body of the trees, and then methodically moving. This area of the painting is basically done at the bottom, this bottom triangle. So, and the truth is this area in the middle is largely going to be done. So I just have to get this ridiculously complicated area underneath the trees. That's going to be the part.
Peggy wants to know, what do you suggest we do to learn to draw? Books, videos on YouTube, classes, etc.
Yeah, great question. Well, my advice on almost all things for the purposes of learning to do something artsy, if it's a technical skill, I almost always recommend a class if you have the time. I just think learning from an instructor in real time is hard to duplicate. So, just a moment, concentrating. That is something that's almost always my recommendation. But some people can't. You know, the neat part also is we're in an era where urban sketching is a thing. So I do feel like we have the benefit of urban sketching groups and things. A lot can be learned from just doing. I do think there comes a point when you really have to, if you want to push yourself past what's easily recognizable as a skill and really get yourself into something new. But I do think, you know, there's nothing wrong with urban sketching. It's good. But my advice is, if you want to accelerate it, right, you're not 12 with a lot of free time to go and paint and make bad drawings and things for 5 years until you get better, then I would take a class. Always a class. That's almost always my suggestion. There was a tree here, and the tree got a little bit lost. Just trying to open it back up a bit. It's a funny little section. This little palette knife can do neat things. It's great for scraping. I did not make this up. Chen Chung Wei showed this skill. And, you know, his advice was, if I could teach you it, then it's not about making art. It's just a skill. And that making art's really about what happens when you have the skills that you need, and then you're working on, you know, what you want to say. And I would agree with that. So in the beginning, of course, the hard part is all you're trying to do is, make your paintings not ugly. So, right, it's so difficult. But eventually, that's a secondary thing. And you think, well, I have some control, right? And then it's really about these deeper things. So he was really marvelous at sharing. Hopefully he'll come to the US again and teach, or to Canada, like he did last time. So we have the beginnings of trees, right? This is the goal. Now we're going to get into this next section. And in this next section, the forest is deep. And yes, love?
Everyone is agreeing that it is a little tricky to not make your paintings ugly.
I say it's easy. Sheesh. Yes, it is difficult. But I mean, I
was going to say, you spent what, your first 3 or 4 years just trying to make not ugly paintings?
I would agree. And I'm still making ugly paintings. I just don't share them every time. That's the nature of art. It's in my hand. I need a wet brush. I don't want this to be all hard lines. So sometimes, just like I did up here, I'm late in the game here in a good way.
This is him spitting on the paper.
Can't they hear me doing this ridiculous
All they
thing?
can see is the back of your head.
Yes, but they can hear.
I don't know, man. I'm just
All right.
clarifying.
Thank you very much. It's gonna make speckles. No, like speckles is my goal and hope. Down here, things recede into the body of the forest, and so it gets darker. This is almost black. It's just ultramarine blue, bird sienna. Sometimes I'll throw a little perylene green in, which is almost a black. And the whole area isn't black, but a lot of it is.
We had 3 questions come in hard and fast here. So
All right, bring it on.
Okay, Manish wants to know, when is the right time to use a knife? When the paper is wet or when it is dry 100%?
Oh, only when it is wet.
Okay.
Only when it is wet. What's really happening is that I am lifting the paint that I put in place. And so the darker that, I know we have other questions, the darker that the paint is that I've applied, if it's still wet but not soggy, I know that's hard to understand, but it can't be soggy. If it's like a wash, it just makes a divot in the paper. It has to be something where it's a little bit thick and still wet. Then I can go about my business lifting. Next question.
Kathy wants to know if you can just splash water instead of spitting.
Well, the short answer is, well, you can do whatever you want. The short answer is, I don't think it works as well. And that's why I tend to spit. Water sometimes is not as viscous as spitting is. And so it just kind of splatters and dissolves more. The spitting tends to provide a smaller particle. They're really like little spittles. They're very small.
I also think it's irregular.
Yes, it is. Of course, I learned that from somebody, Joseph or Alvaro or something, and it was sort of ridiculous. But it works. What am I going to say? It totally works. And if it works, I do it. You can try it with water. It does stuff. It doesn't do nothing. It does do stuff. But I do find spitting provides a more localized, viscous stuff that goes in. It's more like what happens when I might splatter some sort of pigment in. right? Except that I don't want color in this batch. So, you know, in here, just to say, I'm coming through and I'm sort of vaguely following the lines of what I drew. You can't see them, but they are there. They're just light. But it's only an idea. At this stage, for this area in here, I'm much more interested in the division of space with these dark sections, right? I want different sections to be interesting, and I want them to be sort of an irregular balance. That's not easy, right? I just sort of have to feel my way through it. And that comes from practicing composition a lot, right? Was there another question?
You just answered it magically.
Okay.
Linda wanted to know if you were still following the sketch or just kind of making it up as you went along.
It's a little tiny bit of both, but I'm making it up more. You know, I was just talking with Kat the other day about composition and practicing composition and all of that. You know, and I said, you know, I wonder why I like no-tan so much. And I had just done a day of pruning in my other life. I do seasonal pruning, and I also do gardens and things. So I was doing seasonal pruning. And I said, you know, there's a lot of composition in pruning. You know, if I make an empty area in one spot, I got to balance it somewhere else. But of course, you don't want it to look like two halves. You have to somehow make it look organic and natural. Or if I place boulders in somebody's garden, that's got a lot to do with composition. And you know, like a Japanese boulder setting, it has a lot to do with spatial relationships and what's the apex and all of that. So there must be other ways in which we compose in our lives. I'm aware of those ones because they're what I do all the time. But you know, composition is something that we do, I think, all the time, as long as we are paying attention to how space relates to itself and how we create little shapes and how we create balance in ways that are sometimes dynamic, right? It's like a balance that isn't totally even. It has to, you know, this one is heavier and so it's closer to the center, but this one's lighter, but it's farther off to the side, and yet somehow that lighter section that's farther away ends up being more important. You know, that kind of stuff has a lot to do with, hell, even like arranging furniture. So I do want to, I mean, I'm always talking about composition and no-tans and things, and I do feel like sometimes it feels like people don't really know how to approach it. But I think a lot of people are doing it already. They're just not aware of it. Or there were opportunities where they could have been and they weren't, right? So, oh, the door opened. I am racing through these little spaces and just sort of trusting in my experience that we're going to make it, that this be a little grove as we sort of approach the end of this. I can already tell that I want this upper area to be a little bit darker, just a little bit. I'll probably do a wash. And then in the photo, we have a couple of sort of interesting big empty spaces. And I find these empty spaces interesting because they help balance out these areas that are more complex and divided up. So I'm gonna drop. Don't want all the trunks to go straight up and down. I'm gonna come in here and scrape it out if I can. Get out of there. Sometimes I gotta scrape them out. Sometimes I use my fingernails, and then I gotta kind of break them back up. Down this comes. So, you know, they often say, oh, you can tell, like other teachers, that I'm approaching the end of the painting because I'm using a smaller brush, and that is pretty true. So I'm doing a lot of little fiddly work right now where I'm just trying to communicate this active area with what a greater alacrity. Now there's a 10-cent word. Greater truthfulness.
Linda says old credit cards are great for scraping too.
That's true. That's true. Yes. Yep. And I've seen people do something, you know, I don't know why I stopped using one. They actually had cut the old credit card at different angles so that you could one side would only be an inch long and another side would be 3 inches long, and it helped you make different kinds of scraping marks. Right? It does sound very chinish to me. Chin or like a Herman Peckle, you know, sort of thing. All right. So I've got all these brushes in my hand partly because it speeds up the process. I mean, this would be normally how I'm painting, with multiple 2-3 brushes in my hand, where I have different brushes that have different pigments on them, different hue mixtures. One's a clean brush or whatever it might be. That is not an uncommon thing. And sometimes I really have to check, right? Make sure which brush was which. I've done that. That's a bummer. And this is too singular. Sometimes also scraping can do interesting things because the area that you scrape out is almost never as pale as the area that you leave alone. So this is a way to create some variety of value. Kate, I am interested in attempting to blow dry this to drop in the last little wash.
Okay.
The top is close.
You want me to just blitz it?
Yes, in a minute. Just a second here. I'm gonna in just a second.
Okay.
But yes, that's the idea.
Can do.
Thank you. I did just mix a little white with the junk in my warm palette. It's just the stuff that's there. I just wanted a kind of warm, a warm goop. That's a sophisticated term. Okay. And, well, I knew this was going to be a tough painting. And it is tough painting. That's part of the fun of the challenge. So I said it was bringing you guys along on the journey instead of just, I don't know, picking something I had already done 5 times to teach you something that was going to be successful but a little bit boring. I just thought I'd sort of bring you guys along on a paint instead. I'm mixing up a darker green because I'd like for this to come into the foreground a little bit. It's just not that green. It's a little warmer. I'm looking at the, excuse me, I'm looking at the painting. I get a clean brush. Preload the area to get some variety of line, and then push this out. Thank you. And it's not particularly clean, honestly. So I just, the trees here are a little flat. So I'm just trying to create a little sense of variety. Thank you, my darling. So I am pre-wetting some pieces in an effort to get some variety of edge so that it's not all hard like little razors, right? I want it to soften into one section and release itself from the other.
Kathy says it's looking beautiful.
Hey, it's very sweet. It's nerve-wracking doing a demo, frankly. So it is for nature. It's definitely a little bit of a high wire act. There we go. I do enjoy demos. I like talking to folks and doing a bit of the painting. That's a little better. And this has little bits. I like these Chinese brushes partly because they're good at making scruffy little marks that somehow balance between an irregular abstract mark, and yet obviously they're also a paintbrush. I like this combination. So, and I can see the bristles, but they're just messy enough for me that I like what they're doing. Getting a little cauliflower, so I'm just pushing back against it with a new brush stroke to even out the moisture between the different areas, right? So that this area that was dry in the middle, now it's the same moisture level as what was bleeding back into it. This is looking a little bit more like little aspen trees. So it goes. And there's little bits in here. I get a darker green that I mixed up. And I'm attempting to wet my lap. I'm attempting to just get a little bit of moisture in an irregular way on this stuff in the foreground. So that when I drop in a little bit of color, it'll bleed around a little bit. So I'm looking at like for little droplets on the paper, but enough that I can sort of connect some darker value in here. I can see that I want a little bit of a thicket feeling. And I think it needs to be, it's not in the photo, but it doesn't matter. It needs to be this way for the painting to kind of give this a feet so that this shape can sits down and tells this little lie that it's a three-dimensional object. Alrighty. And this is the part where I was talking about, like you do the demo and then, you know, I could see that, you know, this would be better if it was ABC. And then so you can play with it a little bit. All right. And all right, Kate.
Yes.
Oh, great super assistant. I would like to have this, at least the top section dried, and I'm going to put a washback on top of it to
just the top section.
Yeah, maybe from the top of the aspens up.
Okay, and you should let people talk to you.
Sure. Folks got questions.
Yep.
We got 10 more minutes, or something close to 10 minutes. So that's enough time to ruin a painting. Always more time to ruin a painting. That's my goal. Did anybody have any questions while we're waiting? I'll take that as a no, but if you do, unmute yourself. Flower arranging. That's another example. I love arranging bouquets. You know, you have different kinds of flowers. You kind of have one be taller, but you don't want them to all be taller equally. One should be dominant. You know, you want some sort of through line, so you bring in a blade of grass. You want a darker value in one area, so you have a certain flower, and a lighter value goes against the background of dark leaves or something like that. Making bouquets would be a good example of composition, right? It's got a lot to do with arrangement of values and hues and shapes. And if you try painting a bouquet, for me, that really taught me a lot about thinking about bouquets as compositions. Because when you're done and the bouquet has gone away and you've got your painting left, all you've got is this arrangement of shapes on your paper. And the composition needs to be interesting. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, whatever the bouquet was like. And so suddenly you recognize, oh, I have all my flowers at the top and they're in a row or whatever it is. And you wish there was more balance. And what does balance mean? But you can feel it when you're arranging your flowers in the bouquet and you're looking at it. And a lot of that will depend on the direction you're looking at it from, that kind of stuff. So arranging bouquets would be another great example of composition. And I mean, it will be interesting to try making a notan from an arrangement of bouquets, because I think that you would really see the shapes in the bouquet. And to see the objects less, right? So we want to focus on the shapes on the paper, and you need to tell the story of the bouquet, and that's the object. But you also want it to not be, the story shouldn't dominate the shape, in my opinion. How's it going, my darling? All right. It was pretty dry on the top.
It's lifted off the board, so.
All right, that's a good sign. Thank you. There you go. All right. Yes. We'll put in this part on the top. We'll go from there. So, how do I want to approach this last little thing? I want.
Linda wants to know if this is the palette that you use all the time, because she has this one and she only uses it for travel and plein air.
I probably use it for about 90 to 95% of my paintings. If I'm painting big, maybe like a full sheet, 22 inches by 30 inches tall, then I have Birch Trees. And I have 2 of these, and they work great as palettes. So I'll use these 2 for big paintings where I need to do a big wash. But since I divide the wells by hue, like warm, cool, warm, greens, opaques, that tends to do the job. So the short answer is I do use this most of the time. Yes, I think I can get away with this. Definitely a bit of daring too. But.
Karen wants to know, what do you want the center of interest to be in this painting?
For me, it's these aspens and this grove, and then coming down into this complicated area at its base. For me, that's the most interesting part in the painting, in the subject. So there's lots and lots of water in the sponge, just to say. I was just squeezing it out. I am trying to get this to be wet, but not too wet. and to be abstract up top. But I do want a little something more than what I've got there. It's just too aggressive, this transition for me. Yeah, it's way better. I'm going to bring the water down past this line so that we have some sort of transitional space. I'm mixing ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I don't want it to be warm. I'd like for it to be a cool gray.
And Peggy, to answer your question, yes, there will be more demos. We don't have dates yet, but as soon as we do, they will be posted on the blog and social media.
Yes. I just need that mountain to appear. This is the sort of painting, I will admit, that a lot of it, this is a sort of subject that I feel like it depends a bit on having a name. So if I call it spring snow or something like that, then I think it makes a lot more sense in terms of what's the story. So I do think that's true, but I like this subject.
Karen says, could the demos be earlier in the day for us East Coast folks? My dog's legs are crossed.
Well, I have been trying to play around with different times, right? So the last demo was at noon.
Yes.
This one was at 2. Part of my goal has been to sort of see who would show up. It's also on the weekend, so we tend to be lazy in the morning. But like, I've been curious to see if we were going to get any international folk, and where their time zones might be from. So we've not had much in the way of folks from Europe proper, or Australia. We've had a few, but not lots and lots. So we might be able to wiggle around the space. I thought perhaps if I did it at a time like this, it might free up more of my day, honestly. More paint.
If you have particular preferences for time frames, if you could put them in the chat box, that'll give Stephen and I some things to discuss in terms of planning for the future.
Totally. Yeah, break it on. I like this very gently darker idea. So, yep, I do like that. I'm gonna mix it up with a bit of this. Little bit of white to tell the story. Oh yeah, that helps. That helps. And we are approaching the end. But this now looks like something in the background to me. I can see the story of the hill, and I feel like, boop, and we're there. So like, you can see the story of the hill better, right? And I like these little idea of like dark sprinkles for the snow falling, and I'm going to splatter in the few last white ones as well as it slowly dries so that it doesn't just disperse. But this is something where it's really about the story of the snow. So if I call this spring snow, I really feel like, right, we can read the story. It's not just about the shapes, which I think is interesting. And I'm very glad I put this in. When I put this in, by the way, it's worth recognizing, I did a light wash of water. I tested, and then I did a light wash of water, and it definitely went down past the trees that I was merging this new wash into. I'm not somehow trying to make the two washes like line up, some ridiculous thing where I'm trying to cut it to the edge. So I let the edge of this darker gray that I put down be soft, and it lets it wash over the top of this darker earlier wash. And as long as I don't fuss with it, I'm not trying to like, paint with a jackhammer, I just let the water paint for me, then I can get this kind of thing where it looks basically like I put it on before I put the trees in, right? So let's get this. Yeah, that's the story. Did anybody have any questions before we head out?
Just for ease of use, I'm going to unmute everybody. You can
Sure.
choose to stay muted, but I'll just push the button and then there we go.
There we go.
Thanks, Stephen. It's very fun to watch you paint.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Time to walk the dog.
Let the dog out of the closet.
That is funny.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Merci beaucoup.
Ah. Wrong language for you. Yes. See you later, Mary Steele.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Steve. That was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you. Need to learn to draw. Thank you.
Yes. Do the drawing. Do it.
That was really great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome, you guys. We'll have a video, I think.
We'll check it out.
We're gonna check the video and see if we got it to work correctly, and if so, then I'll be sharing it, and then you guys can watch it again if you want to.
Cool.
Stephen, this is Sheila. I sent you a chat. I don't know if I got it through to you because I don't know how tech savvy I am.
Huh? Oh, you sent me a chat by Instagram or by?
I don't know. No, just now.
Was it through Zoom?
Yes. So
I don't think I got it, Sheila. I'm sorry.
I may not know how to do it, but I also sent you an email. I wanted to send you a small donation as a thank you,
but
I don't know how to do that.
You did send this to me. Thank you so much.
So if you can get back to me, I'd appreciate it. And
100%. Thank you for following up. You did send that to me. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
you
I'll
got
get
that.
back to you.
Okay, as long as you got that.
Thank you.
Thank
Sheila.
you.
I appreciate it. All
Talk
right.
to you soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi.
I was a little concerned here for a moment, but this made a tremendous difference. It's weird. And then just a little bit of the white on top has been pretty good. Made a pretty big difference. But these little darker speckles up above, I like that combo. But there was some point in the middle. Sometimes it happens. You get a little lost. You think, how the hell am I going to make this into a painting?
Oh, Peggy's still on, and she would like to know if are you using white paint or gouache?
There's honestly not a lot of difference, but the short answer is this is gouache. For years, I also used titanium white watercolor paint, and this is titanium white gouache. In my research, the primary difference between gouache and watercolor paint is that the gouache is manufactured to have larger particles. So that's why it's more opaque. And I believe it's partly why it's more matte. That might be the binder, and maybe they're not using gum arabic. Or it might be that the particles are so large they don't sink into the paper as well, which is why it reactivates so easily, which can be good or bad. So I got the artist gouache because it comes in a much bigger tube, and because it's cheaper for the giant tube, and it seems to do a better job of coverage. What's that? So so that's the story on that. It's artist gouache.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm the one from Key West, and I really enjoyed painting snow.
Yay! My pleasure. Let's sign it. I agree. Maybe we'll sign it in green.
Yeah, I was gonna say that dark one was a little too dark there.
Something like that. I
Tricky.
don't know. I feel like I could put it on top of this little spot here.
Yeah, I kind of love that spot though.
Well, I know, but over here it'll just be lost.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of be goopy.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
It won't be lost. It'll be lost there. We got to do it over here.
Okay, small.
Yes, ma'am. There we go.
Yeah,
That's pretty small.
that's beautiful.
Okay.
Jackie says thank you very much.
You're welcome, Jackie. It is a pleasure to have you, as always.
Oh, I love being a part of it always.
Thanks for coming again.
Of course, just let us know the next time when it's happening.
Yes. Yeah.
And
100%.
your-
It'll be on the website.
Your partner in crime is really good.
She's essential. She's a dream.
Thank you, Jackie.
She is. All right. Bye-bye.
She is. Bye. It's funny as it dries.
Sure.
So there's some sort of balance between how dry the paper is and how dry the paint is, the paint on the brush. But it's fine, and we'll have a variety of ones. Well, that was fun.
Yeah. Does anybody have last questions before we sign off here? There's still a handful of people hanging out, so I figured I'd double check before I close it all up here.
Hello, no, I'm hanging out. This is Sue from Australia, and I'm an hour late.
Ah, you made it. Great. I'm glad you made it.
No, I only made it right now because
Oh.
because 9 o'clock Sydney time is an hour ago for us. So I'm like being at the end of the meal and going, oh, look at all that dinner.
Well, we're gonna do another one. And the first one we did was at noon. Noon Pacific Standard Time, which would have been like 6 or 7 o'clock Sydney time.
Yes.
Maybe?
Yes.
And this one we started at 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, which would have been, I thought it was 9 o'clock Sydney time.
That must have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's either 8 or 9. So anyways, they're always going to be
I think we're going to stop telling people what time it is in their time zone and let them figure it
fair
out.
enough. But it's going to be, I can't imagine we're going to do them on Sundays. So for us, we're doing it on Saturday. That works better for our schedules. So they're most likely going to be on Sunday mornings for you at some point.
Perfect. That'll be fine.
We've we've been attempting to make it so that if I've had a couple folks say they want to sign in from Europe.
Yeah.
And for them, like if it's 9 o'clock in the morning for you, it's like 10 or 11 for them.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to somehow wiggle it around to like sort of an equal hardship. Maybe like 7 o'clock for people in Australia would be like 9 o'clock for people in Spain.
I just keep telling him to do different ones, but he keeps trying.
Or, yeah, or paint at night. Hey, it's no worries.
That's true. We should look and see what happens if I paint at night. Maybe it would work.
It's no. We can all paint at night. That's not a problem.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Any excuse to paint. Oh, this looked fun. So, yeah. So I'm sorry to have missed it, but I'll hang out for the next one.
Perfect. We're gonna do more.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
All right, I'll close this up then.
Thanks. Wasn't sure.